And there we are. Hello, everyone. Welcome to The Reason We Learn and Success Without Schools. I'm your host, Deb Philman. This is my co host, Hannah Frankman. If it's your first time to the channel, please give us a like, subscribe, share the show to get other people here to hear about wonderful things you can do outside of the school institution. Today's Hannah's topic, I think, because it was her pick, and I'm going to let her lead with it. So, what are we talking about today, Hannah?
We're talking about building competence in kids, which it's an interesting topic, I think, because it's not something that really is part of the mainstream conversation around education, but it's one of the most important pieces of education. If we're trying to raise kids to become self-sustaining adults, they need to be competent in navigating the world and making things happen, solving problems, creating the results that we want. And it's way down at the bottom of the list of things that people are talking about in the mainstream when they're talking about raising kids. So I'm really excited to delve into this. I'm curious if you have anything to add to that in terms of defining competence.
That's I was thinking about that before we started. How would I define competence? Be pretty much the same as what you've said, being able to function, in the world. But I think as important is just knowing what you, the individual, need to function at. And that's about prioritizing and making those important decisions about what do I need to do versus what do I want to do. So there's kind of you have the physical, tactical competence of I can actually do stuff and how to balance my checkbook and I know how to ask for help and all these things. And then there's also I can navigate my own thought processes and emotions sufficiently that I can choose my battles and I can, bite off what I can chew, reach for the stars, but I don't like fall off a cliff, that kind of thing. So there's a kind of intellectual, emotional kind of competence that, some people are talking about social, emotional, all that. I don't think of it that way. I think of it just in terms of that maturity where, you know, you know you know your own limitations, you know where you can push yourself, and you know where you should probably leave well enough alone. So I'd
Yeah,
add
the
that.
self-awareness component of
Yeah.
competence. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
It's so interesting to me how integral this is in raising, like you've said this many times, talking about raising a whole person, a whole adult,
Mhm.
not just a student, not just an employee, not just a
Right.
person on a career trajectory, but a whole human. And competence is such a huge piece. If you think of all the components, all the elements of a whole human on a pie chart, there's a very large slice that is dedicated to things that fall under the umbrella of competence. It's very important. But I think that a
Okay.
lot of school is, and this will get a lot of pushback, this will be a spicy take for like the kind of traditional education crowd, but a lot of school is really built in a way that um, stifles competence, it disables competence because there's no room for it. Kids are never given a chance to go try things and fail or succeed and adjust course and have all of these like self-directed personal responsibility intrinsically driven experiences that are what
Mhm.
competence stems from, because people learn competence. It's not just, all right, you sat in this padded room and you checked all the right boxes and you selected all the right letters on this multiple choice test, and now you are a confident human and you can go out into the world. That's not how competence is formed. It's
Right.
formed through trying things and through finding the guardrails and bouncing off the walls a few times and saying, okay, this one doesn't work, this way doesn't work. It really is, I don't think there is a way to learn competence without trying things and failing a few times in a real world context. And push back on me if you disagree with that, because that's a strong opinion loosely held. I'm open to being wrong about that, but I feel like in my experience, when I think back to how I became a competent adult, it was by trying stuff I didn't know how to do and doing it, and then saying, okay, my tangible capabilities have expanded because I now know how to do this thing that I didn't know how to do before, but also my self-esteem and my self-confidence has expanded because I feel more confident in my ability to go try something else and figure it out until I succeed. And I feel like that is what has made me a competent human. And school
Right.
gives kids very few opportunities to do that. So most kids go through school never being challenged to learn any type of competence that would actually translate to the real world. And I think you see it when you interact with kids who've only ever been in a public school environment, and they're maybe just a little bit lost when it comes to doing something in the real world, kind of the stereotypical teenage, I don't know, like, how do you do this? I don't know.
Well,
That's
you have to you talk about trial and error and failure, but the key to competence is knowing what to do when you don't know what to do. So in other words, if somebody isn't coming along and giving you specific direction, being able to assess the situation that you're in and decide, is there an action that needs to be taken? Because sometimes there isn't. I think we do get on a treadmill sometimes, and especially in school, where there's always a thing. There's always that thing, assignment, a thing, a do a thing. And there's not very much opportunity to just reflect on what you've already done. There's not a lot of time to really apply the things you've already done to something else. So, there's always a thing. What's the thing? Is it on the test? Do I need to know this? Do I need to know that? So they tend to even be told what's important. So first you've got to decide, do I need to do anything in the situation I'm in, or can I sit back and just kind of like observe for a little while? And then the next thing would be, what do I need to do? What do I need to delegate? What do I need, so there's so many pieces of this, and it all starts with having nothing really given to you. You just find yourself somewhere. And if you think about it, the true test of competence is exactly that. Like, somebody drops you in the middle of an unfamiliar place, an unfamiliar job, an unfamiliar whatever, and you set about trying to figure out how you fit into that situation, what you can do, what you can contribute, what you can get out of it, whatever it is. And then what's not yours to do, right? So I find that the extremes are represented in school. There's that's not my job, the teacher has to tell me, or that wasn't assigned to me, or I don't need to know that because it wasn't directed. So you get that sort of extremely passive. And then you get the other one where it's like, I have to be perfect, I have to do it exactly right, or I won't get the A. And there just isn't a lot of room for judgment. And part of competence is that too, right? Is, just being able to judge effectively where you fit in the situation and what you need to do or not do.
Yeah, I think your point about knowing what to do when you don't know what to do is so key. And I have a story for this, of how I learned this lesson. So and for people who've listened to the show before, you already know this part of this story, but when I graduated from homeschool high school and decided not to go to college and was doing this 4-year experiment to figure out what I was going to, like, how to be successful without a college degree, basically was the goal going in. I spent most of those 4 years working for Praxis, which is, again, if you're a newcomer, it's a college alternative program, like a startup apprenticeship program for people who want to skip business school and go straight to the business world. And I started out as an intern there. A very stubborn intern. I would not leave until they gave me a job, and eventually they did. And the job that they hired me for when they eventually gave me a full-time position was, I was their boot camp coach, their boot camp advisor. So my job was to coach all of the people who were in the first stage of the program. And I had mega imposter syndrome going in because I think I was 20. I had just turned 21 when I landed this first full-time position. So I was still a baby, and half the kids I was coaching were older than I was, and they didn't know that. They probably assumed that, but nobody knew explicitly. And I was so afraid that somebody was going to find out and be like, why am I listening to this 21-year-old about how to start my career? But
because
and I was following in really big footsteps because our education director, who had been the boot camp coach prior to me, TK Coleman was just a coaching rock star. He is the greatest coach I've ever worked with. He is amazing at what he does. And so I was coming in, I was like, I don't know how to do this. What if somebody asks me a question I don't know how to answer? I know all these technical things about how to do the program, but I don't know anything about starting a career actually. Like I've just been faking it all this time and I'm about to get caught. And so
Right.
this was one of the first lessons that TK taught me when he brought me in and was training me for this role. And it was what to do when you don't know what to do. And basically, he gave me the rundown when I was on a coaching call. What do you say when someone asks you a question and you don't know the answer? And he had a whole playbook for this. He's like, well, people really, more than anything else, they want to feel heard. And so as long as you are listening and you understand the problem that they're explaining, then they will give you so much grace if you say, let me go figure out an answer to that, because they will feel like you understand the problem and you don't have to have the solution right there. You can go figure it out and they'll feel like they're getting 5-star customer service because you care so much about their problem that you're going to go talk to other people and you're going to go do research and you're going to go figure out the best answer. And I was like, oh, that's brilliant. I don't have to have the answer. I just have to make them feel heard, ask questions, let them talk about it, make sure I understand the problem. And then I can just say, that is a great question. Let me go talk to somebody who has expertise in this and I will get back to you. And it felt like such a weight came off my shoulders because now I knew what to do no matter what happened in a call. Somebody could ask me the weirdest off the wall question and I would have a response. But the funny thing was that once I had this in my back pocket, I would go into calls and people would ask me questions and I'd be like, nobody's ever asked me that before. I have no idea. So I'd start saying, okay, they have to feel heard. So I'm going to ask them some clarifying questions. And so I'd start asking questions and I start to realize I actually had the answer. And most of the time I'd get on a call and someone would ask me a question that I'd never heard before, never had to articulate this, never looked at it directly. But then they'd ask some questions and we'd have a conversation and usually something would bubble up or I'd be like, oh, this appears to be, there's this correlation between this other problem I've solved over here and this problem this person's having. And I feel like the advice will translate. So I actually very rarely had to have a conversation culminate with, that is a great question. I don't know. I will get back to you. But there was so much power in knowing what to do when I didn't know what to do. And so when I eventually took over the advisor program a couple of years later and I was training the coaches, that was the first lesson I gave everybody was here's what to do when you don't know what to do. But it was also some of my favorite advice to give the Praxians that I was coaching who were stepping into their new jobs was, regardless of what type of role they were going into and what type of work they were doing, the idea of having a backup plan when you don't know what to do was so integral. And so this is more related to like college age kids who are out trying things in the real world for the first time, having something in their back pocket. But it applies, the same principles apply across the board. Teaching your kids how to navigate situations that they've never seen before and don't know how to handle is one of the best gifts you can give them. And it really is, it's pretty simple. And it's something that school, again, it like does the antithesis of teaching this lesson. It always tells you what to do. And if you don't know what to do, you're supposed to sit down and be quiet and wait for instructions. And so, or raise your hand and say, hey, can someone tell me what to do here? But really, you need to be teaching your kids, if you don't know what to do, that's a great, like they come to you and they say they don't know what to do. And the best response you can give them is, that's a great question. Let's figure this out. Like what might be something you could try? Is there a solution that you could try solving? Do you need more information? Can we go ask questions? Where can we ask these questions? How can we find this information? And once kids understand this on a meta level, because it's a very meta question, it applies to everything. And I became conscious of it. I think I was doing a lot of this in school too, but I became conscious of it in this experience with Praxis. And it's something that's bled out into everything that I've done in my life ever since. Like I'm co-hosting a conference now, an education conference. Never done anything in the conference world before, but I'm like, I don't know what to do, but I know how to figure it out. I know how to navigate this room and discover all of the places that I can be valuable and what needs to happen first and what problems need to be solved. And I'm able to do that because I understand this meta lesson. So that meta idea is so important to teach your kids. And it's something that literally everything they've never tried before that is like safe for them to do and legal for them to do. You can't have your 11-year-old be like, I don't know how to drive a car. And you're like, okay, cool. Like figure it out. Where would you start? But there's a lot of things that you can let become lessons for your kids. You don't have to have the answers. And you're actually doing them a greater service if you're facilitating them figuring it out, as opposed to just telling them the answer, which is another thing that school gets so backwards. And they're missing opportunities every day to teach kids competence, but they also don't care about teaching kids competence, which is part of the problem.
No, they want to teach them to feel the right feelings, as Paul Rossi and I just discussed. One thing I'd love to ask parents out there listening to do is, if you have school-age children, ask them when the last time they raised their hand in class or went up to the teacher's desk, if teachers still have desks, and ask them a question about the work they were doing. And I mean, not just, where am I supposed to be? What group am I in? But really I don't understand this term, or what if I want to do it this way, or, some kind of a substantive question. But when's the last time, or if you can think of it, have you been helping your child with homework and heard, I don't know what I'm supposed to do, and wondered why they didn't ask the teacher? This is epidemic right now. I think it's always been a thing, as Hannah's pointed out. School discourages these kinds of competencies, like, asking. And that's so funny. They use the word competency all the time in school, but they mean it very differently. The competencies they reward right now are being nice to other people, being feeling and caring and inclusive and, loving and all these things, right? Knowing the right incantations about social justice, all that those are the competencies they're looking for. They're not really looking for how well the child gets their needs met in terms of their academic learning, or how well they get their needs met when they want to be creative and they want to do something, outside what was prescribed. And so, ask your student, what kind of questions have you asked your teacher about this work? And consider not helping them with the homework until they ask the teacher first, like until they do the asking. And it sounds really mean, but if they're not being homeschooled, where that would be part of the lesson, they've got to learn it some way, and the school isn't going to do that. That what I've noticed is kids will either copy off each other, they'll call a friend, which isn't quite the same thing, right? You go out in the world, you're going to have to deal with people who you're not friends with, and are older than you are, younger than you are, different people, and maybe your boss, and you need to be able to face your boss in a job, or a mentor or somebody, and say, I'm lost. I want to do well, but I'm not really sure how to do this, or I have an idea for how to do this, and I just wanted to run it by you, and I want to approach you with this. There are so many kids that would never touch this. They're overcome by fear about this, largely because they don't want, it's public. They're in front of their peers. So that's a big part of it. But the other part of it is they simply don't believe it's allowed. They don't believe it's allowed. And so teaching them that it is allowed, whether it was explicitly stated or not, and that this is how you own your education. This is your education. You interacting with the material and asking questions is a competency you can't leave school without, or you missed a big chunk of it.
Yeah, you miss a big chunk of what you were supposed to learn in school, and you also learn out on the effectively infinite in the 21st century learning potential that exists for you as an adult. I say effectively infinite because obviously it is actually, there is a finite amount of information in the world, but compared to the human capacity of how much you can get through in a lifetime, even if it was your full-time job, it's infinite. And so when we're teaching kids that they shouldn't ask questions, how on earth are you going to learn something as an adult without signing up for like a continued learning class, a community college class? How are you going to learn stuff if you don't have the capacity to ask questions like this? But it is, to your point about it being discouraged in kids and them thinking it's not allowed in school, they view it as a punishable offense. It's something that can get you in trouble if you ruffle feathers too much, rattle the cage too much. You're going to get in trouble for it. And that's such a weird, when you think about, when you remove it from school and you think about it just in terms of development over a lifetime, because we also do this weird thing where we lump development into school years and then post-school years. And yes, people are absolutely going through different developmental epochs during that time. But this idea that there's like the learning that you do in school and then the life afterwards that learning is preparing you for, thinking of that as sort of an exhaustive set of parameters around how learning works is very strange. Because when you think about, when you remove yourself from the school paradigm and you're just like, okay, so somebody's going through a lifetime and they're learning more when they're young and they're doing more when they're older, but they're still always learning and adapting. Thinking about teaching somebody the lesson of don't ask too many questions, don't try to figure this out for yourself for these first 12, 18 years, I guess, like until kids are adults. And then after those first 18 years, then you have to do a lot of that. It's like, who made these rules? This is a very backwards game we're playing. It's just very, the rationality behind it breaks down very quickly when you look at it from any angle other than making sure that all the kids are conforming to this system, because otherwise the system doesn't work.
Right. And, one thing you can tell children about this, if they're struggling with this, is teachers are just human. Okay. So they're not just a bigger, they're not magical people who know everything. They're not just a bigger version of you. They're adults, but they're still people. They're still human beings. And they might think they've explained an assignment or explained a lesson to you as well as it can be explained, but they've explained it their way. They've explained it the way they know how to explain it, and that may not be the way you need to hear it. And so without you asking questions, the teacher can't know. Whether the teacher is mom or the teacher is a teacher in a school, the teacher can't know how to help you, can't know how to explain it differently or point you in direction of somebody who can, if you do not voice your confusion. So you're not giving them a chance to help you. You're not giving yourself a chance to learn. And that interaction is really everything. I mean, that's also how we identify the good teachers and the not so good teachers. It's not because the good teachers aren't the ones who explained it perfectly to all 30 children who have different ways of seeing the world, the first time. They all got it and they immediately did it, right? In fact, if you could construct a lesson that was so easy to understand that you didn't need to answer any questions, it would be a pretty poor lesson. So, if I were a teacher and nobody's asking me anything, I'd be like, all right, come on, guys, what's up? So as a parent, you can, if you're looking at teachers, look for that too. Look for how much they kind of nudge the question asking. Like, I must have left something out. Come on, you guys, ask me something. What you got? Any questions? Any confusion? And those who are not so great are the ones who are going to punish the kids for being disruptive, for asking questions or getting up out of their seat because everybody's doing seat work or they're doing group work and the kid, goes over to the desk. The teacher who really gets it is the one that says, how can I help? What do you need? Do you I'm not going to give you the answer, but great. You've got something. What do you got? That's that level of enthusiasm, even for confusion, is good teaching. That's what you're supposed to do. You're confused. It means your brain's working. You're trying. It's not connecting. That's okay. That's why I'm here. That's literally my job. My entire reason for existing is not to hand you a piece of paper or to tell you to do a thing on an app and then go away. That's not teaching. That's like presenting, assigning. I don't know what the heck that is.
Yeah, it's sort of being the there's a metaphor that's bubbling up for me and it's not, I can't quite grab it, but you're just, it's proctoring, really. It's not teaching.
Yeah. Exactly.
It's being like, you're just the delivery guy. You're not doing anything meaningful yourself. Which is, I take such issue with on so many levels because it's dehumanizing to everyone involved. Yeah. But this is something, so when I was coaching at Praxis for years, this was a problem that we ran into a lot. We've talked about deschooling some on this show, but we talked a lot about deschooling the college age kids who were coming into our program because they would run into all of these issues that we're talking about because they never learned this stuff anywhere else. So we would have college age kids who were coming into Praxis and waiting to be told what to do. And we were trying to teach them agency because when Praxis was designed, I keep using past tense because I used to work there, but it's all present tense. It is designed to bridge this gap between kids coming out of school 18, 19, 22, whatever, and who want to break into the workforce, and then like bridging the gap between that version of themselves and the version of themselves that is a competent adult that can go into a working environment and be a contributor in a meaningful way. And that gap was really hard to bridge because kids were so passive. They would come into the program and we'd say, okay, week 1, you're going to build a project. Like we're diving in head first. Let's go. You're going to choose a project that you want to build, and you're going to spend a week building out this whatever project you choose. And it would be really challenging sometimes to get kids out of this permission-based mindset where they'd be asking to be told. Like they wanted a playbook of, okay, so what's step 1? And then what's step 2? And obviously the degree of this varied among different individuals, but there's definitely residual mindset at the very least that people were carrying into this adult world where they were bought into the whole self-direction thing, and they were bought into the whole self-responsibility, I'm going to go figure this out for myself approach, and they still would struggle with not having.
What are the 10 steps to being self-directed?
Exactly.
Wow.
Exactly.
Yeah, but it's tempting though, because it's not even just school. We live in a culture that tells you every time you turn around, there's a right way, there's a perfect way to do something.
You can go your
this sort
whole
of
life
Martha Stewart culture. Like this is the
just following
perfect.
instructions. It's crazy how you can go your entire life without ever critically thinking about anything and just subscribing to all of these different people who teach how to decorate a home, how to plan your family, how to move in your career, how to organize your finances. You can just defer all of it and go through the whole, your entire life in just this dream, which is, it's crazy to think about, but it's also, it's totally possible. And that's what we're up against, because we're getting people who for generations have done that. And it's an interesting.
Well, I mean, remember the original model of schooling was designed to provide factories with workers. So it was set up as an assembly line to sort of mirror that process and to make sure that the people who came out of it only aspired to so much, only were a certain amount self-directed. And, they obviously knew there always be those people who, get out of their way. They're going to take the world by storm no matter what you do. It's just inborn, right? Like a temperament, but they're usually in the minority anyway, in the general population. And they were okay with that because of the economic structure of the country. Well, obviously things have changed, and things did change a long time ago, except for schools. Schools didn't change. And the more they changed, the more they just reinvented the same thing to make it look more modern. So, we're still factory producing little people widgets and meat puppets and whatever, but we use fancy words to describe how we're going about doing it, because the factories we're putting them in don't look like assembly lines anymore. They look like little cubicle farms, so it's just changing the shape of the organization into which you're supposed to, fit the little puzzle pieces. And so it's they as you said, they actively discourage that kind of competence that we're describing, and it's up to us parents and others to fill the gap or get them the heck out of there while there's still time. And obviously we know what my preference is and yours, but there's still a lot people can do. If your kids are in the school, you just are going to have to do work. You're going to have to, and you're probably going to bump into, Hannah, you've described this. You're going to bump into competition from anti-competence land, right? You're trying to teach competence, but that takes energy and work and initiative. And how many years can a child who starts off full of initiative, usually most kids are like, let's go, and it gets drummed out of them pretty quickly. So how many years of that can you go, and where parent steps in and says, all right, now we're going to take initiative again. And the kid's like, why? Like, why do I need to do that? Like, that doesn't get me an A. That doesn't serve a purpose. This is good enough. And they doing it right for them is doing it well enough to get by, get the A, get the B, whatever it is they're striving for. And anything beyond that, they need to be sold. I've noticed.
Yeah, well, it's funny because it plays to um, this very real component of human nature that is almost it actually is a survival mechanism. And there's a great essay about this by Venkatesh Rao, and I can't remember what it's called. He has a great term that he coined for this phenomenon. Basically, the idea is that you're as a human, and this is an ingrained survival mechanism, literally, it's an energy conservation mechanism. We're wired to only expend the amount of effort that is required to be successful in what we're trying to do, because it is incredibly detrimental for long-term survival to spend more energy than you need, because you're wasting energy and then you're going to die because you're going to run out of energy. Like, you have to be efficient. And this is sort of, it's not exactly the shadow or the dark underbelly of our innate interest and curiosity, but it definitely is a very real counterbalance to this, where we have this innate curiosity and drive and hunger to learn. And usually it is in balance with this simultaneous need to be efficient. And when we drum out the need to be curious, we don't allow it anymore. The only thing that is left is this tendency towards mediocrity, because mediocrity gets you, being the average gets you where you need to go. And so we have all of these kids that we're training to only do what they have to do to be successful and no more, because it's a waste of energy to do more. And we're not allowing this natural counterbalance of curiosity and drive and inspiration and interest and self-direction to balance it out. And when the two are operating in harmony, it creates a very effective process and system where you're consistently motivating forward, but you're also doing so in a way that is efficient and not wasting tons of energy. It's not like, all right, I want to learn how to run, so I'm going to sprint as fast as I can until I fall over. Like, we're not wired to do that, because it's not, we wouldn't have survived if we were. But we just are left with the curiosity, the hunger to know what it's like to be a runner is squashed. And so all we're left with is this tendency of, when someone tells me to run, I'm going to do exactly as much as I have to do to them to say, okay, you're running. I'm not going to badger you into doing more of this, but I'm never going to sprint of my own volition, because what on earth is the point? The desire is gone. And so we end up with these kids that are becoming extremely efficient at being mediocre, which, again,
they're pros at it.
They're incredibly efficient, but they don't know how to harness the drive at all. And it's a really weird phenomenon. And when you look at, this is a little bit tangential, but when you look at the people in life that are very successful, that people, and there's an irony here, because people will point to these examples of school dropouts, like the Mark Zuckerbergs and the Peter Thiels of the world, and they'll be like, yeah, but your kid's not going to be like that. So, like, not everybody's Mark Zuckerberg. Everybody else has to go follow the traditional path. But the principles that apply, like, yes, there are outliers, to reference Malcolm Gladwell's concept of outliers, people that skew the statistics, for those who aren't familiar. Yes, that's absolutely true. They are outliers, but the principles that made them successful apply to the smaller examples too. Like, if you're just trying to have a nice house in the suburbs and a happy family, and that's the extent of your ambition, which is totally fine, very worthy goal to have. All the same principles still apply, of being competent and being leading to being successful. But we almost discredit these examples of competence, because it's like, well, everybody is going to be an outlier, so what's the point? It's not going to work for you. But the examples are there of kids saying, no, I want to go do something. I'm confident enough in my ability to go figure this out and solve this problem. I'm going to go chase it. And then being wildly disproportionately successful because of that.
Isn't that funny how we have the internet, we have so much technology, we have the ability to see every step of the process that someone takes along the way to become one of those outliers, one of those, like high flyers in the world of achievement. And yet, as broad as it is, as deep as it is, the the bandwidth tends to get dominated by the outliers. Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, all these people. What people don't realize is how many millions of little mini Elon Musks there are. They don't have as much success or as much money, but they're no less accomplished in their own right in different ways. But they don't get the coverage because it's not so extreme. It's not so over the top. It's still in the top 0.001% of achievement. And I think it's kind of a shame because um that's where you get the like, oh, why bother? When I was teaching first grade, I had so many students in the school where I was working who actually read pretty well. Now, mind you, this is back in 1990, so they read pretty decently for first graders. And when we work on writing, they would say the same thing. Why should I bother? All the good stories have been written. I don't have anything new to add. They'd been reading, novels and so forth. And so I got this book by Chris von Arlsberg. I don't know if you've seen it, but it's called The Tales of Harris Burdick. And what it is, Chris von Arlsberg, for those who don't know, illustrated the original Jumanji book and also the Polar Express. And so he did a book called The Tales of Harris Burdick. And Harris Burdick, there is no tale. Each page is an illustration, black and white illustration, as only Chris von Arlsberg could do, very surreal kind of illustrations with a caption. There's a single caption. And then it happened, or like he told her not to do that, no, there'll be like just one little caption of whatever this bizarre scene was. Like in one, there's an inside of a cathedral and there's a nun sitting on a chair, but it's up in the sky, almost like the nun in the chair is just like flying down the alley. Okay. So what I did was I assigned in teams of 2, I assigned them one of these illustrations with a caption. And I said, don't work together. You're just going to be the team doing this illustration. Okay. And I want you to tell the whole story behind that. Tell the whole story behind that picture with that caption. I grant you they're a little bit weird, the picture. So it's a little bit more of a story starter. Okay. It's not just like a picture of a red barn, but you could do that too. And when we were done, I had them share, they were using sort of invented spelling. It's still first grade, right? But when they were done, they read their stories aloud to the rest of the class. And they could hear how, first of all, they all had something unique to say about whatever this scenario was. They were good. They were sort of entertaining. And people were like, what else happened? Then what happened or whatever. And the point of the lesson wasn't for them to do a great writing, wasn't for them to learn how to do a topic sentence or to come up with, examples or to write a perfect story with a beginning, middle, and an end. The point of the lesson was to teach them how actually competent they were at storytelling. They just had drummed it out of themselves by virtue of being competent readers. So they were good readers. So they thought, I can possibly be a competent writer because I'm not as good as they are. And I'm like, you don't have to be Elon Musk. You don't have to even strive to be that. You don't even have to strive to be J.K. Rowling. You just need to be you, the best you that you can be. And wow, look, you're competent. Now you're a competent writer. But if you don't even try, if you hang out in the land of it's been done or I can't be as good as the outliers, then you're incompetent. I mean, you're incompetent in everything. So the kids got it. I think they got the lesson. There were some great little stories that came out of it. I would recommend that lesson to anybody else. Like, try it. Try doing that if you're homeschooling. Try something like that with your kids. See what happens.
There's so much that I love about that story. I love it because I also come from the writing world. So I've coached a lot of writers. I've worked alongside a lot of writers. I've written a lot of things. And it definitely is one of the core issues that people have well into adulthood is everything's already been said. What do I have to add to the conversation? And I love this idea. And I've heard of exercises similar to this before where everybody uses the same prompt and then writes something totally different. I think Stephen King talks about this some in his books on writing too, this idea of how varied people's imaginations are. And that's been one of the weird lessons for me too, is that I have a lot of ideas about education that aren't necessarily super mainstream, but I forget that not everybody knows this stuff, because to me it just feels
Right.
so mundane because it's a part of my day to day. And that's another lesson
Exactly.
that's so powerful to teach kids, is just because it feels redundant to you, or just because it feels familiar to you, does not mean that it will feel familiar to anyone else on the planet, and doesn't mean that it's not a lesson or something worth sharing, which I think is such a powerful lesson of this exercise, and part of why I love it so much. But it also, it ties back to the idea of this practiced competence, this idea of competence through action, which again is the only way to learn it. You cannot learn competence through a textbook. There is no way that you can go sit down, read a book, and walk away feeling competent. Competence is a very physically grounded experience. Even if the work that you're doing is all virtual or it's all in your head, it's still, it is a real world reality phenomenon. It is not something that exists in the hypothetical academic abstract. It is real.
Right.
So
Right. And it
having,
doesn't even have to be academic. It can
yeah,
be doing something. So back in the day when I was a kid, kids had paper routes. They babysat. Even I babysat when I was 12 years old. I mean, now they're waiting till they're 16 and 17 or whatever. And people's like, I would never let a 12-year-old babysit. I'm like, okay, well, people did. So like I was a 12-year-old babysitter. And in my neighborhood, it wasn't like people were, leaving me alone until 2 o'clock in the morning. It was like parents wanted to go out to dinner for a couple hours. They'd have me watch their littler kid and they'd pay me, $10 or something. And I would do it. And, you rise to the occasion when you're asked to do things that you're, first of all, physically capable of doing. And secondly, that, somebody is expecting you to do it. Like, I expect you to deliver the paper. I expect you to walk the dog. I expect you to mow the lawn. There's so many little tasks that kids today are not only not asked to do. Laundry. They're not even asked to do it. It's presumed they can't. And they're missing just hundreds of opportunities to develop competence at life skills, and even just to feel like, well, if I could go from not knowing how to do laundry to doing laundry, I can go from not knowing my multiplication tables to knowing my multiplication tables. It's not really that different.
yeah. And I've heard this theory, and I don't know, I'm actually curious to hear your take if you think this holds water, that I don't really have a take on it. I just think it's an interesting thing to think about. That part of the reason that kids are so, and we'll use the word sheltered from like chores and jobs to, we'll use that as the umbrella. The kids are so sheltered from this stuff because they are, like, their parents had to do all this stuff, and their parents think, well, I want my kid to have a better life than I did. I want to be nicer to my kids than my parents were to me. So I'm not going to make them do all this stuff. I'm
I'm
so
the
curious
mean
to hear your
one. Like,
response.
I had to do it. You have to do it.
Do you think that this is a factor? And like, because you talk to a lot of
I
parents,
do
you talk to a lot of
actually.
educators.
Yes. But I think it's more than that. I think that may be the case for a percentage, but I think it's actually darker and more um unflattering to the parents. I think we are extremely conflict averse people. And I think whether it was the self-esteem movement, the anti-bullying movement, or just the emphasis in the 80s and so on everybody sort of like getting along and you're okay, I'm okay, and all this, that somehow we as a culture conveyed to people who are now adults and adult parents that people, even your own children, being in conflict with you, not liking you, being angry at you, cussing you out, like slamming a door in your face, whatever, was like the worst thing. That your job, especially as a parent, was to maintain peace at all times. Now, it could be because some of them grew up with absolutely no peace in their household, and so they thought that peace was like the goal. Nobody fighting, everyone getting along, everything looking normal was the goal. It could be because they had a super normal, peaceful environment and they don't know how to deal with any kind of conflict. Or it could just be that we live in a very agreeable, smiley culture that places that above competence, that sort of like, and, but what I see is conflict avoidance. I see that I don't want to say no because of what's on the other side of the no. The equivalent of my toddler is screaming and yelling in the checkout aisle, so I hand them the candy. So they'll be quiet so we can calm everybody down, instead of I'm picking your little ass up and we're walking out the building and I'm leaving my grocery cart right there. And I guess we don't have food tonight because somebody had to have a hissy fit in the checkout line. Just saying. I mean, like that's a whole lot of conflict, but most people are cowards. I'm not dealing with it. Now, when I hear stories about, from my grandparents' generation, where there is no way that would happen. Like, kid acts out in the checkout line of the grocery store and they might get a back of a hand, which I'm not saying I approve of, but I'm just saying there was just an unspoken agreement. There's certain things you don't do or something not so awesome is going to happen. There'll be a consequence. Consequences somehow went away. And I don't know exactly why, but I think it's a conflict aversion thing that's underneath it all.
Well, it also doesn't have to be, because I think a lot of people will hear that sort of thing and think that teaching their kids competence has to be a fight. And I don't think that that's true at all. It's not you against your kid. It's not you versus the kid. No. It's you with the kid. And it's you and the kid together. And most kids, and you touched on this earlier, and we've touched on this many times before in the show, many kids are born extremely competent and extremely hungry for competence. Let's go with that instead. Extremely hungry for competence, extremely hungry to do things themselves, and they're just never allowed.
I do it myself.
Exactly. And Kevin Cooper, who was the kid who wrote under the pseudonym Cole Summers, he's a great example of this. If for anyone who's read his autobiography, you'll remember these stories. And for everyone who hasn't, it is a must read. I think it is probably, before I read his book, before he wrote his book, Dumbing Us Down by John Taylor Gatto was my most oft referenced. This is a book that every parent should read, but honestly, I think Cole Summers' Don't Tell Me I Can't is actually the most important book for parents to read, because it's just so paradigm shattering. And
for those who don't know, tragically, he did die
this past spring in a kayaking accident. Yeah, it's very, very sad.
Yeah, I'm going to put his book up here.
Such an amazing story. And he is such a great example of a kid that he has a whole chapter in his book about this, where he talks about when he was a kid, his catchphrase was "me do it." And he wanted to do things and his parents let him. And he was wildly competent. He knew how to change tires and fix engines when he was a little kid. He bought and flipped a house when he was 10. He owned his own ranch. He owned his own tractor. He had all of these amazing things that he had accomplished because he was consistently allowed to keep saying yes to these opportunities that presented themselves to him and these desires that he wanted to go chase. And yeah, he absolutely had interests and desires that not every kid has. And not every kid has the drive that he has. But again, it's like an Elon Musk type example, where there are going to be very few Elon Musks in the world because there are very few people who want to work that hard and are that ambitious. But the same things that made Elon Musk great work on a local and a micro level too, where you may be the Elon Musk of your little town, where you're the person who's employing a bunch of people and has a business that you're running, and the same things are going to take you there. A lot of the same like mindset principles. And the same is true for Cole Summers. A lot of these things that he did, they apply to a lot of kids. And when you read that book, it just completely shatters your perspective on what kids are capable of and what's possible for them. And that's why I want every parent to read it, because there are
I agree,
stifled who have this potential.
Another thing it would be fair to remind people about is how old, or rather young, many of the signatories of the Declaration of Independence were, including its primary author. So, we're talking about people who lived a veritable lifetime before they put pen to ink on the Declaration of Independence, and they were still in their 20s.
Yeah. And they had done so much, and they lived in a world that allowed them to do so much. Kids were apprenticing when they were very young. It's like, all right, you hit double digits. Let's go. It's time to go be an apprentice somewhere. Exactly. You're working on the farm. You're navigating reality. And our modern education system, the standard system that most people are defaulting to, is so divorced from reality that kids never get to utilize the infinite amount of learning experiences that exist in their world on a daily basis. There is so much that kids can go do to learn in the world around them, like send them to the grocery store or go to the grocery store with them, but let them be in charge. Let them pick a recipe and buy everything they need for the recipe and handle checking out and talking to the adults. And yeah, they might be terrified the first time, and I'm not saying push them into doing it. That's a whole separate conversation, how to navigate the give and take of pushing your kids, but also supporting them, encouraging them, loving them, not forcing them to do things that they're going to hate and resent and feel traumatized by. But like, what better way to learn how to interact with adults than going to the grocery store and asking somebody who works there how to find something and talking to the lady at the checkout and handling the monetary transaction. It's how you become competent navigating the service industry. And you do it by doing it. You don't go to school and reading a book. All right, so when you're an adult, here's how you go buy something at the grocery store, and here's how you check out. And a lot of kids never learn it. And I think this is also a contributor to, I saw a meme recently about being terrified to ask somebody who works at the grocery store where to find something. Like, I would rather walk around the grocery store for an hour and look at all the shelves and ask somebody how to find something. And that was so weird to me. But well, I'm not an introvert, but also it was so weird to me because I'm like, but I just grew up going to the grocery store and watching my mom ask people where to find stuff. And it's just what you do. But most people never do that as kids.
No, they don't. And I mean, I've known of kids that don't even order their own dinner in a restaurant. Like the server comes and says, you know, what, and they like look at their parents like, order for me, you know. And this is really disturbing. I mean, these are the same kids that, you know, the people behind today's education trends are telling us the kids are old enough to make permanent life altering, you know, decisions about their bodies and things. You know, I won't go down that path, but you know what I mean, right?
Well, college debt too. Like,
what?
That college debt is a life altering decision.
Oh, yeah, even at 18, like, oh yeah, you know, oh, tens of thousands of dollars, fine. But these are the same ones that like, oh, we've got to do away with paper routes, and we've got to do away with having child laborers and whatever. And you know, they think child labor equals like you're in a sweatshop, not, you know, you're a bagger at the grocery store or you're a little stock kid at the local bodega or whatever. I mean, we need to bring back these kinds of jobs that, first of all, we don't even have people who want to do these jobs. These jobs are fairly menial. They don't pay very well, but they need to get done. Okay, robots can't do everything. And I know there are plenty of people who run restaurants, they run small grocery stores, they run small boutiques, whatever, who would love nothing more than to give a kid, you know, a 12-year-old kid a chance to just do some menial tasks for a few hours after school or whatever to take care of some things, but they're not legally allowed to do it, or they have to do it on the sly. And if they get caught, you know, it's a big to do, oh, child labor or whatever. But these are opportunities that we had. I'm not even that old. Okay. And there were jobs that I did. I'm some I did for free, but it was like, do you want to learn how this business works? Come on in. You know, you can do this. In my fantasy world, we go back to that, where if there's an industrious kid who says, you know, I'd like to learn the retail business, or I'd like to learn the grocery business, or I'd like to learn the whatever business. And the person who runs such a business can say, come on by every day and just watch. Don't get in the way. I mean, I'm going to hand you some things to do. If you want to earn some money, you can do this, this, and this. Let them work.
Yeah. And entrepreneurial opportunities for kids too. And I'd like to let's talk about solutions to this. Let's talk about things that parents.
Yeah, we just have a few minutes left anyway. So
yeah,
let's talk about
one of these is entrepreneurship. So as you're talking about this, I'm sitting here thinking I am currently dog sitting and house sitting for a friend who lives in this new construction neighborhood. I don't even know how many houses. There are hundreds of houses here. And everybody has a little yard, and most people probably don't own their own mowers and weed whackers, because like, what's the point when you have this little tiny yard? And there is just this opportunity ripe for the picking for some kid in this neighborhood who's like 12, 14, 15 years old, who either their parents own a lawnmower or they want to put a little upfront investment into buying it. Like, you just need a push mower. There's not even room for a riding mower here. Go door to door and pitch every neighbor on taking care of their lawn, charge them 20, 30 bucks, whatever. And you take care of their lawn. You come every other week to every house in the neighborhood, or however many you can get, but probably most of them need a lawn care service. You do a great job. You keep everything nice and neat. It's not that hard to set a level, a quality standard that will impress people. and it like the kid doesn't even need to know how to drive, which is a huge barrier to entry for young people who want to do this type of work. Well, if you can't drive
That's
your
true.
equipment around, what are you going to do? If you're in a neighborhood, you don't even have to know how to drive. You just push your lawnmower over and you take care of the yard,
That's
and
right.
you make, if you're doing $20 a lawn, which is super cheap, you could definitely do it for more than that. But $20
Right.
a lawn every other week, you've got 100 houses in the neighborhood that you sign on as clients. That is a ridiculous amount of pocket money for a
Yep.
kid. And it's
Absolutely.
totally possible for them to do. And probably the neighbors would rather support the local kid versus whatever lawn care company that they're currently using. And so the
I
opportunity.
would literally do that job right now if my body would allow it. Like, I need to make money, and I would absolutely be out, like, going around, like, cleaning up people's yards. My own looks like crap, but I would do that just because I know it needs to get done. And, there's so many opportunities for kids today. If you're in a city, especially where there tend to be more people who are sort of seniors, they can't get out much. Maybe they're a little afraid now these days because it's a little bit scary with crime and everything. And you'll run down to the store and do their errands for them, go pick up their medication, et cetera, and so forth. I mean, my goodness. And you for what, like $5 a trip? Here you go. I'll give you $5 if you go pick up my medication. I mean, you could just do that for 10 people in your
Yeah,
building.
yeah, you make bank. It's the
Absolutely.
opportunities are endless for kids. And I think for parents, this can be addressed on like a micro, a mid, and a macro level,
Yep.
where on a micro level, every time your kid has a question, um, again, come back with a question too. Like they say,
Yep.
why is this thing this way? And come back with, I don't know. How would we figure that out? And
Exactly.
allow them to internalize this process, but then allow them to go try things in the real world too. Um,
Right.
and there are a lot of schools that are being built that kind of build in this competence philosophy too. Like Acton Academy is a great example of this, where they don't even call their adults in the room teachers; they call them guides, and it's very much a student driven, student centric education approach, which is so cool. Like
Right.
it's so awesome that people are building schools that allow this type of students leading their education type of approach. But like
Yep.
encourage your kids to go do these real world things that push them to build competence, because it is maybe the most important meta life school skill beyond learning how to learn. Like it might be the second most important.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I think we've given people plenty to chew on. Of course, to make any of this work, y'all are going to have to limit the devices. You're gonna have to get between your kid and tech, which is just another reason to get them out of the schools. But that's like, you know, we could say that every day, every show, whatever. But yeah, I mean, if this is you're gonna get, why do I need to go if I can just ask this thing? And that's, don't let them have this thing all the time. Then it won't be. And I don't want to make it the boogeyman, tech, because it can be very useful, but I think, chicken egg, like, have the kid learn how to learn and learn how to ask questions and harness their own initiative and all that before they're sort of addicted to the dopamine device. And then they might even use it differently. Might. You're still going to have to be disciplined about it, I think. I don't know. What do you think, Hannah, about that?
I think this warrants a whole conversation at some point in time. I don't know if this is next week's topic, but at some point, I think it's worth delving in, because I think there's a lot of nuance to the conversation around tech. Like we can't escape it. It is part of kids' reality. It's also it's going to be a part of their adult life. It's going to be part of them navigating the adult and working world. So it is something that they need to learn how to use in a constructive
That's
way.
true.
And there are also so many things that, like, I actually think there is a really valuable educational component to TikTok. I hate TikTok, but I think there is a valuable educational component. And that's the more controversial take, because, like, obviously YouTube is super educational.
Right.
So I think it's more of a guardrails thing. Like, I don't think it's parents against tech. I don't think we're fighting it. I don't think we're at odds with it. I think it's just something that kids need to learn how to use it constructively. but that's
Well,
we
I
can have
mean, let's
a
face it,
conversation
TV
about
can be
that.
garbage.
Mhm.
TV can be garbage.
But
Like,
it can
all of
also
it
be
could be
cool.
addictive garbage.
It can also be
Exactly.
valuable. Your
So
kid can get super into a historical TV show where it's sparking a whole fascination with history because
right,
they're following the story, but they're seeing how people lived in a different era, and then that leads them down rabbit holes.
exactly.
It's a complicated topic. Is
Very
my
much so.
I'm not deflecting the question. I'm not trying to deflect the
No,
question
no,
at
no, and I
all.
didn't mean to go down, like, another rabbit hole. We'll try to do a show about tech and all this tech and learning, but, I just meant, like, to harness to encourage competence.
Yeah.
I think you do have to set some guardrails and you do have to decide what the limits are, because anything that can pick up the slack for the child, either cognitively or physically, it could get in the way. That was my
Yeah.
only point.
No, I
So you just
agree
have to keep it in mind.
completely.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's our show for this week. Thanks to everybody who joined us in the chat. I really appreciate it. If you're watching on the replay, thank you for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe. And we will see you next week. Thanks, everybody.